Hello, co-journeyers, and welcome back to The Truth So Help Me Good. I am your host, Barbara Landry, and together we continue to explore some of the bigger questions about this journey we call life, with inspiration from my upcoming memoir, The Truth So Help Me Good. Welcome to episode 12. My special guest today is published author Carol LaChance. Carol grew up in post-World War II England and came here to the United States as a nanny at the age of 20. She has been married to her husband Albert for 44 years, and they share 2 daughters and 4 grandchildren. Carol made her career as a teacher for gifted and talented students, and upon retiring, trained to be a birth doula. Among her passions are spiritual practice, her relationships with children and animals, especially horses, writing, and yoga. She is an ordained interfaith minister and has a deep love for the sacred, which she shares with her husband. In her memoir, she weaves together her life experiences, her passions, and her spirituality in a brilliant tapestry that integrates her inner and outer journeys. Her memoir is titled A Sacred Walk with My Father, My Husband, and My Horse. Welcome, Carol, and thank you so much for joining me on The Truth So Help Me Good. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thrilled to have you here, too. So let's start at the beginning. You grew up in post-World War II England with your parents and your siblings, and both of your grandfathers also fought in World War I. How do you think those experiences impacted your family as well as your own upbringing?
That's a really good question, one I've actually only come to really think about later in life. My parents were both quite young. My mother was only 8 when World War II started and was sent to boarding school at age 11, so for most of the war. And my father actually joined the Navy and went to what was called then Ceylon from his studies at Oxford. He left university and served in the Navy, and I think he was only 18 or 19. During the war in England, there was, the famous mantra that's everywhere now on cups, keep calm and carry on. And I think that sense of keeping going was very much a part of my parents' whole early life. And they really wanted to give their children a much freer and happier childhood than I suspect they had because of the war. And my mother tried really hard to do that. I was the oldest of 5 children. The brother next to me died at birth, so there were four living siblings. My grandparents, both my grandfathers, as you said, fought in World War I, and I think there was quite a lot of PTSD in both my grandfathers. My mother's father was shot down in a plane over the Channel, the English Channel, on a way back from a mission in World War I, and my other grandfather, my father's father, was temporarily blinded with mustard gas in the trenches during World War I, and none of those things were really spoken about at all in my family. From a young age, I really sensed a deep sadness in my mother, and I took responsibility for trying to make her happy at a very young age. My father was sort of a little bit more on the outside of the family. He worked a lot, he traveled a lot, but I was always trying to seek his approval when he was home. And so I think I became the good girl, the oldest child that was expected to set a good example.
So when and how did writing become part of your life? Can you describe some of those early experiences with writing?
I've always loved writing. I started writing when I was young. I know I did a little chapter book when I was 8 about a horse that I illustrated. I don't really remember any feedback about it, so I don't even know if I showed that to anybody, but I was pretty proud of it. And as a teenager, I wrote a lot of poetry, and really enjoyed writing, just little stories at school and things like that. I met my husband Albert in a creative writing workshop over here. He was the teacher. And once I went back to college once I was living over here, I really enjoyed writing, even papers and all the things you do in school. I've just always loved it, and I still love writing today. It makes me happy.
Well, you are a published author. Can you tell us about your published work?
Yes, when I was early 30s, after my second daughter was born, I started writing a book that came to be titled The Way of the Mother. I think I wanted a roadmap for myself as to how I wanted to show up for my daughters. And the chapter titles were, I'm going to read them because they've stayed with me in my life as very important things: birth, beauty, terror, death, creativity, relationship, and wisdom. So there were 7 chapters that I wrote about. And these topics still really speak to me. I've always been fascinated by how we hold the balance between birth and death, and beauty and terror, how we explore creativity, how we become whole in relationships, and how we seek wisdom. So those have been signposts for me all through my journey.
And are there specific experiences that you had as a younger child that may have contributed to that, I'm going to call it fascination, or that interest?
I think for me, as I look back, Barbara, the things that really were impressions on my soul, like photographs on my soul, were the places that I grew up. We lived in the same house for 52 years. I was privileged to be surrounded by beautiful English countryside. I spent a lot of time on the cliffs, the white cliffs, on the beach. We played a lot with the trees in a certain place called Hyanadova, which is where you can overlook this beautiful snaky river in the Cuckmere in Sussex. And I felt very loved by the earth when I was a child. I loved being outside. I loved playing with the waves, and I felt safe there, very safe. And I can still go back, and a lot of the places are unchanged, which is a huge gift for me. I love going back. My cells kind of relax in a way they never do anywhere else. So I think that had a big impact on my childhood, was the places.
Carol, spirituality plays a big part in your memoir. What were some of your early spiritual experiences that led you down a spiritual path?
I think I was always sensitive. I'm a sensitive person, and I think I was sensitive to that sense of God, the idea of God. We went to church as a family only on the big holidays, but we were all there. And I remember as a child walking my grandfather, who was getting old then, up to communion with me. I was baptized in the Church of England. I was confirmed. I remember my confirmation very clearly and feeling how important it was, although I couldn't have told you why. So I think I was always sensitive to this idea of something bigger than me. And both my grandmothers taught me prayers, and one of my grandmothers, my father's mother, read me poetry. And that felt very spiritual to me. I'd sit on her lap. She was a big woman, very cuddly. and she'd read me poetry. And my other grandmother, my mother's mother, really instilled in me this sense of the preciousness of things. She kept very special toys that I was allowed to play with when I went to stay. So I think those early experiences really made me aware of treasures all around me, if that makes sense. This sense of a treasure that is bigger than me, but also in certain things that are imbued with meaning, because I got to play with them.
And how has spirituality continued to play a significant role in your life? You were a birth doula. You are an ordained interfaith minister. You practice spiritual practices on a regular basis. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes, I'd love to. I think there's been that thread for me throughout my life around birth. I did not have a very easy birth with my first daughter, Becky, and was in the hospital, and the doctor was very abrupt and really, looking back, kind of cruel, and very much a power over experience for me. He had the power. I was, he was doing with my body what he thought was best, and it was a really negative experience that I just let go of because I was so thrilled to see my daughter when she was born, of course. But with my second daughter, I sought out community of women who were really interested in birth as a natural process and taking responsibility for giving birth. And I just loved the whole atmosphere. I got myself a midwife. So our second daughter, Kateri, was born in our home, and it was just a night and day experience. And for me, that was a peak experience of my life. Both my births were, but in that one, I really felt my power as a woman. I really felt that my body knew how to do this. And yes, it was painful, but it was also incredibly exciting and, a miracle, really, to have that baby be born into Albert's hands and to be at home with all of it. And so birthing sort of taught me that you have to go through the pain, that it's a process, and that joy's on the other side. And the thing that makes birth the easiest, in my experience, is if I can let go and surrender. And that is kind of a key belief or core belief that I have for my life. And so when I retired from teaching, I decided to pursue what had been a lifelong longing, really, to help other women give birth and to have the experience that I had had. And so I think I attended about 15 births, plus I was at each of my grandchildren's births. And just what a privilege, to watch how we're all different, we all deal with birth differently, but to go through that is such a rite of passage, and to be able to be a witness and a support and to care for women as they go through that. Again, highlights of my life. I just loved it. And I think you asked me about interfaith ministry. I did that much later in my life at the seminary for the Temple for Interfaith Studies in Milford. And for me, that was like putting a crown on my spiritual journey. That's the only way I can talk about it. It was a deep inner journey. It was not without its own obstacles and difficulties, that's for sure. But it felt like it was a path that took me even deeper and even closer to the God of my understanding. So I'm really grateful that I did that.
Your memoir is about your relationship with your father, your husband, Albert, and your horse, Max. Can you explain how those relationships relate to each other and why you chose to make them the focal point of your memoir?
Yes, I hadn't set out to do that. I started writing a memoir about my relationship with Max only, but I began to realize that these masculine relationships had both really challenged but also rewarded me and called me to grow. They really made me struggle to become who I really am. And so I wanted to include both my father and Albert in the memoir, which I've done. Each relationship is different. My father supported me really beautifully in cognitive ways. We had an adult relationship that was full of discussions and talking. He taught me how to collect stamps. He played word games with me when I was a child. He allowed me, well, I chose to work in his business for a few years in London. So all those practical kind of things he gave me. Albert taught me we taught each other really how to open up our emotional lives, how to share our feelings, how to heal past hurts together. And he's still my best friend today because we've been through all that work together in many ways. And then I got a horse in my later 40s, a lifelong dream. And I learned a whole different way of being myself, which was instinctual. It was an instinctual relationship. We became partners in a dance of being, is the way I would describe it, because there's no words. You can't talk and have a horse respond. You have to learn how to use your body to give directions and to connect. And he just taught me a whole deeper layer of who I was. And so I really feel that I am who I am because of each of those three masculine beings, I'll call them, because Max is not a person, in my life, that they're all a powerful part of me, and I wanted to write about that.
What is your hope for readers? What is it that you hope for that they will take away from your memoir? What is the legacy you want to leave from your story?
I think that's a really good question, and I think what I want to say first is that I hope readers take away the fact that, to me, stories really matter, and that we each have our own story. And that the spiritual journey for me has been about telling my story and finding that inner truth through the stories of my life and the memories that I have of them. Because I think, we all, I consider that I've lived an ordinary life. I think we all do, but I've had these extraordinary meanings in my life by telling my stories. And I think everyone has those if they have the privilege of the time to really look at the stories in their lives. And what I found out when I mined those experiences was that there was pain but also joy, and ultimately this radical self-acceptance and self-love. As I told the stories, I began to be able to forgive myself, forgive other people, to stop the search for approval that I had with my dad, to stop having to take care of everyone else like I did with my mom. And it's in telling my stories that I learn who I am. So I hope that, when people read them, they will say, oh, I felt that way, or oh, I did that, or oh, I get that. Because we all have such universal we have unique experiences, but we also have universal truths that happen to us in our lives. In my first book, I use this quote from Muriel Rukeyser, and it says, "What would happen if one woman told the truth about her life? The world would split open." And I think what's true about that is that when we tell the stories of our lives, our truth does split open. Our world splits open and we find our truth. So my hope is that readers would recognize something of themselves in my memoir, and to quote Pema Chodron, who's a great teacher of mine, to say, "Oh, she's just like me."
Well, I am so glad that you have written your truth and told your story, and I know that there will be many, many others who feel the same way. So thank you so much for doing it, Carol, and thank you so much for sharing yourself with us today.
Thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. It was really fun to talk to you, Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Take care and be well.
Take care. Be well.
Thank you, co-journeyers, for listening. I look forward to being with you again soon. Take care and be well.